I'm thankful for all of you for joining us for this book launch. To start with, I will directly go to Professor Ramaswamy to share his thoughts on the making of this work.
Years of habit was too much when speaking. Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for being here. It's gratifying to see a turnout like this. I was well pleased to have this book released over here, so to say, today. The entire story of the Kosambi started over here, not far from where we are. And I think it's very fitting in some sense that the first public occasion where I have a chance to rip open some paper, or whatever happens over here. I'm also very pleased to be able to do this at the ICG, where I was a scholar in residence. Well, I was in residence, not much of a scholar. I was still sitting in writing. But I was over here for about 3 weeks last year, where I technically finished the book, so to speak. But I'm also glad to acknowledge my debt to the University of Goa, the previous Vice Chancellor, Ramaswamy, thank you for being here. No, because I do, as the incumbent, as it happens, Kosambi chair of the visitors program that you have had at the university, that was a special privilege for me to come there. And while I was here during those visits, I made now actually 3 visits. I managed to track down the place where he lived and went and saw his, various relatives and so on. So it really facilitated me in a very important way, and I'm very pleased that I've been able to deliver something like his story.
As not quite a peace offering, but as sort of a return for the favor. Well, there's been a little coverage in the press today in the in different newspapers in Goa, and I don't want to sort of go on about it really. My entire purpose right at the beginning is mainly to thank you, and to also thank the panel who are over here to read, comment, and critique, I hope, the book as well. Thank you very much.
Today's book launch is very special to Goa University. Not because we are co-partners in hosting this event along with International Center Goa, but largely because of the fact that in the last couple of years, the way in which Goa University is proudly claiming legacy of Kosambi. The school which I belong, it's named as D.D. Kosambi School of Social Sciences and Behavioral Studies. And there is not a single day in our life when we don't take his name. In fact, our day starts and ends with him. We also have a chair which is named after D.D. Kosambi. It's called as D.D. Kosambi Chair in Interdisciplinary Studies, which is generously funded by the Directorate of Art and Culture, Government of Goa. And this chair makes it possible for university to invite eminent scholars across the discipline to Goa University. And it's more heartening that one of the first biography, and the first biography in English on Kosambi, comes from an author who is right now the visiting professor, who holds the chair of Kosambi, and a work is coming on Kosambi. And in that sense, ICT is also, I will say, honored to see this book launch because it's coming from their residence in Scholar. It's almost 60 years since the passing of Kosambi, and we don't have a single biography. There is a brief account in Marathi, and I don't think there will not have been any right person than Professor Ramaswamy to write a biography. This is largely because of the similarities that you find with their lives. Both have traveled the same path. Kosambi studied in US. Professor Ram has a degree from Princeton University. Kosambi came to India and worked at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. Professor Ram also returned back to India to work at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. Kosambi was fascinated about statistics, and it is the statistics which eventually pushed him to history, philology, and all kinds of other disciplines. And we have Professor Ram, who specializes, or his research interests are computational biology and statistical physics. So it's all about numbers. What is more fascinating is that he employs the same methodology which was actually pioneered by Kosambi, which is popularly celebrated as combined methods, to write a biography of his hero. So in terms of the layout of the program that comes through, we are 3 speakers. Each one of us will take 15 minutes. We will start with Dr. Vivek Mandero, then Kaustubh Naik will speak, and I will speak at the last. Once we are done, we will open it for the audience for Q&A, and we look forward for Professor Ram to taking up the questions. Yeah, I would like to request Dr. Vivek Mandero.
Thank you, Parag. Actually, there is a lot more in common between in the backgrounds of the speakers, because I also happen to have studied statistics when I was a graduate student. And well, the other thing which I share with D.D. Kosambi is that I am a convinced Marxist. Okay, and I think you cannot describe the work of D.D. Kosambi without understanding the fact that he was a convinced Marxist. He used to criticize what he called the OM meaning official Marxism. And I would like to confess that I am an OM in the sense that an orthodox Marxist. I consider myself as an orthodox Marxist. And also, I'd like to briefly differ with the initial introduction about leaving science. I never considered that I've left science. Okay. In fact, I feel that what I'm doing today as a trade unionist and a worker in the left movement is a part of that perspective. Because as Kosambi says repeatedly, and I think I would like to reassert here, I think science is not a subject. Okay. Science, there are subjects in science like the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, life sciences. But the thing about Marxism is that Marx was probably the first person to articulate how social change is also a subject for science. So then, after Marx, in his German ideology and in his thesis on Feuerbach, after Marx, science is no longer a subject, it is a method for understanding reality. And as we know, a method of science is based on evidence-based reasoning. It's based on rationality. Having said that, so Marx never considered what he was doing as something different from science. In fact, there's some paragraphs where he says that there's only one science, and that is the science of the real world, and society is part of the real world. I would go further to say that Marxism also is not a subject. Okay. And Kosambi was also an orthodox Marxist, but as an orthodox Marxist, he criticized not only people like Dange, okay, who was one of the foremost Marxist practitioners at the time that he was active, but he also criticized Marx. He criticized Marx's Asiatic mode of production in his writings. And he was completely orthodox, because an orthodox scientist always looks at things critically. And science is not a subject, science is an approach. Marxism is not a subject, Marxism is an approach which allows a lot of criticism, a lot of critical views of even what the founders of the subject formulated. So Kosambi was probably the first person to assert that Indian history is also something that can be studied with the method of science. And in his various writings, this is what he tried to do. And of course, we are free to differ with his conclusions, but it has to be done with that rigor, with that scientific approach. Now, I'd like to commend the author of this book, Professor Ramaswamy. Rumla Thapa has described it as a very accomplished biography. I would go further. I would say that it is a masterpiece of biography, because the amount of homework that has gone into writing this book, you have to read it to understand how much homework he has done. Particularly, I think this is the first place where all the writings of Kosambi over the years, annotated at least year-wise, they have been over several pages, 15, 20 pages, very, very useful exercise. And I would go further to say that this book about DDK, which is titled, what is the title? One Life?
Many worlds.
One Life, Many?
Many worlds.
Many Worlds. Actually, this book about DDK is not about one life, it is about two lives. Both were lives of DDK. The first DDK was Dharmananda Damodar Kosambi, who was this DDK's, whose photograph is there, his father. And the second DDK was Damodar Dharmananda Kosambi, okay, whose photograph is on the cover. But the book itself, the biography, tells us a lot about the achievements of Dharmanand and the importance of Dharmananda Kosambi in the formation of Damodar Dharmananda Kosambi. So it's actually more than one biography. It is, I think, two biographies which are there in this single volume. And I would like to also inform the audience, because that's not something which is very clear from the book, that Ramaswamy has written other books about Damodar Kosambi, particularly his writings on mathematics, and a collection of those papers on mathematics is the subject of another equally important book, which is something which is very often neglected, because it's difficult to write about Kosambi's mathematics, because Kosambi's mathematics is not simple. It is high-level mathematics in differential geometry, in statistics, and in subjects like as esoteric and as challenging as the Riemann-Zeta hypothesis. I am not as critical of Kosambi as Ramaswamy is about the mathematical work of D.D. Kosambi. But I will say that it is really work that does require a closer and a more thorough examination. And there was this book which he wrote and sent for publication, and it was lost. But I'm glad when I discussed with Ramaswamy that the annotated notes for this book are there in the now what is called the PM Memorial Library, formerly known as the Nehru Memorial Library, I think. And they're available there, so that's something which really would calls for an investigation. Hearty congratulations, Professor Ramaswamy. I talked about two books, right? This one now, which is inaugurated today, and the book on mathematics, his mathematical contribution. There's another book called Adventures into the Unknown. And there, I think also Ramaswamy, who edited that book, has brought certain documents to light. For example, 15 lectures that DDK gave on dialectical materialism, and the notes for those lectures are in that book, which I'm very happy that I was looking for that, and I was glad to find that in the book. So this work is invaluable, and finally, I mean, if I started talking about the various aspects, the kinds of things that he has talked about, mentioned, the personal details, it's really extremely interesting, not at all difficult, not at all boring. It's a work of elucidation, and Kosambi does deserve elucidation because his writings are not very simple. Kosambi was in many ways very far looking person with a lot of vision, who was confident enough and brave enough to criticize atomic energy while he was part of TIFR. And he was working under Bhabha, who is the father of atomic energy. But his criticisms of atomic energy, which he makes in his writings, are no less relevant today as they were then. And particularly today, where there's a proposal to put up, earlier there was this proposal to put up a imported, very expensive power plant, 10,000 megawatt power plant at Jaitapur. That is now, I wouldn't say in cold storage, but it has not yet seen the light of day. But there are new proposals for new things like so-called small modular reactors. And everything that Kosambi wrote about atomic energy in his writings is equally applicable to these new proposals. Unfortunately, these are subjects which can be looked at with the method of science, but they are not looked at for various reasons. We do need to examine all these projects with the critical tools of science. And though Kosambi talks about the importance of solar energy, I want to highlight that Kosambi talks about not just about solar energy, but about distributed solar energy, which is solar energy which is there, in every village, in the rooftops, which is not in the control of corporates. It is not under the control of any big supplier of electricity. And today we have solar energy being talked about by as part of Viksit Bharat, where the energy is concentrated. It's generated, in Gujarat, and it is brought by transmission towers and expenditure to Maharashtra. Or in Maharashtra, it is generated and it is pumped into dams which are being built so that that can be used as a pumped storage system, which is going to displace, many, many people. So these are all issues which are scientific issues, which are very contemporary issues, which need to be discussed. And they are controversial issues, but I think Kosambi never shied away from controversy. And if you are being scientific, you also can never shy away from controversy. You have to go with where the evidence takes you. And finally, I would like to congratulate the University of Goa for keeping the tradition started by both the Kosambis alive, and not only establishing a chair school of social sciences in the name of Kosambi, but today morning it was the inaugural session of the D.D. Kosambi study group, which is very good because they were all young people in the hall. And if the young students of Goa University started reading Kosambi, there are so many subjects. Kosambi was intrinsically multidisciplinary. And that group, when it starts work, it's going to really give a shape to the kind of research and kind of studies, the kind of academic growth of the university, because Kosambi was such a rich person. So I'd like to congratulate Professor Rahul Tripathi, thank him for this invitation for me so that I could come here and be part of this. And I'd like to also thank all of you. It's good that a person like D.D. Kosambi can attract such a big audience. I think that is a very good sign for the future of intellectual discussion and intellectual growth and intellectual traditions in Goa, for which Goa is known. And with these thanks, I will take your leave. Thank you very much.
5 of us who are here, Kosambi, Professor Ram, Dr. Vivek Montero, and Kaustubh Naik. What connects 4 of them is the thread of America. And Kaustubh Naik is doing his doctoral work at the University of Pennsylvania. Over to Kaustubh.
At the outset, let me thank Professor Tripathi and Dr. Pushkar for inviting me. And since the theme of today's discussion seems like we are listing out our similarities with the man himself, even though I am now studying history, I have a bachelor's in computer science and an unfinished master's in computer science as well. So I'm not far from the scientific community as well. To be completely honest, when Dr. Pushkar asked me if I would like to come and speak at this event, I already pre-ordered the book, and had this opportunity not showed up, it would have lied on my desk for a longer period, and this event became a reason for me to read it, prioritize it up, because especially when you are writing your thesis, reading for leisure becomes slightly a pain, because you're reading anyways a lot of material. But as a rule of thumb, I try to pick up some book or the other which is quite far from my research, just to divert my attention. And I picked this book up thinking that apart from Kosambi being a Goan and a historian, what else could be similar between him and I? And the more I read about the book, the more it resonated with me and my own life in some senses. And I'll come to those points eventually. The biography is written so evocatively that like I said, I was trained in sciences again, like Kosambi, and not just my foray into history, but his experience as a US student that Parag just mentioned. There's nothing to not like in this book. If you think of this book as a novel, it's a protagonist is a gifted genius, a high achiever with wide-ranging interests, completely consumed by a pursuit that complemented his beliefs. There's travel, there is exuberance of youth, rich correspondence between multiple actors, maybe even an unrequited love interest. I'm not going to give more spoilers, but you should pick this book up and read. And you also see a deep, vulnerable person. His vulnerabilities, his eccentricities, and the contradictions that so often get masked when we talk about geniuses, when their public-facing persona, sort of overshadows what the actual, flesh and blood person that these people are. When you speak of Goan history, there are two names. When you utter those names, the question that follows is which one, which is D.D. Kosambi and P.P. Shirodkar. Because both these people have, their fathers and their sons both have the same initials. It's a matter of pride, immense pride for us Goans, that someone from this very soil rose to become a force that defined an epoch, not just in Indian history writing, but in Indian knowledge production as such. And the book walks us through his life. The sheer breadth of Damodar Bab's interest leaves you awestruck. I'm going to make a few points, very brief. The first point that I wanted to make, and what I realized while reading this book, so if we look at the time period in which the book is set, and or the book talks about, and we often talk about these towering figures in 20th century, be it Gandhi, Jinnah, Nehru. There is a certain connection that we often make with London, because that's the most obvious metropole that the Indian middle class or elites had, and they went for their training, they had their influences coming from there. But not much emphasis has been placed on people of the same generation, I guess, who went to America for their training. And we obviously now know a lot about Dr. Ambedkar and his time at Columbia, thanks to a book by Scott Stroud on his time in Columbia. There is also Sridhar Ketkar, who was a PhD scholar at Cornell and eventually became one of the major figures who wrote an encyclopedia in India. Also wrote one of the earliest theses on caste system, which then later Ambedkar cites in his Castes in India and their mechanism. There is Anandibai Joshi, who was the first female doctor who studied in Philadelphia, in the same city that I study now. And so this book, when I read, and I was not aware of DDK's time in America, and those are the chapters that I first read, when I picked up the book. And this book then fills up a crucial gap of how some of our 20th century intellectual production was indeed impacted by American institutions. And that brings me to a second point that I wanted to make, and it's a very crucial point I wanted to emphasize today, is that the book isn't just a biography of DDK. It's a biography of institutions as well. In the book we travel through Harvard and Princeton in the US, or TIFR, Ferguson, Aligarh, BHU, the Bhandarkar Institute, Gandhi Ashram, and the Soviet counterparts of these institutions. Through DDK's career, we see what these spaces were grappling with as a new nation was being imagined. And you realize that these scholars were building something designed to outlive them, to holding spaces for people that will come much, much later than them, And it's interesting because it's not like these institutions are being built for their own career fulfillment. The modern academia, especially because I am within academia, you see that modern academia has also produced this kind of this individual, celebratory, academic, and we often overlook the role of these people in building institutions. And you realize in the 60s or like in 40s onwards, these kind of institutions being built, the way they are being imagined, the way they are created, the way they are thought of, it really gives you a sense of what kind of nation that we were hoping to become in that period. So in that sense, this book also is an account of institutions that, by DDK's own work, he ventured into or he was touched by. I was deeply moved actually when I was reading the acknowledgement that DDK's personal book collection became what eventually became the JNU library. And just like it's an institution that I have also studied, and it's that, and that's the point that I'm trying to make, that these people eventually bequeathed all their knowledge and possessions for people like us. I've spent a lot of time in the JNU library when I was there, and I did not know this fact. I may have picked up a book that maybe belonged to him or not, but like this act of, the very fact that his books remained there made my connection with DDK slightly more deeper and meaningful. And the last point that I'll make is that why this history matters today. In 2026, as we see institutions being dismantled in front of our own eyes, and JNU being one example, but I don't want to exceptionalize it, because so many institutions of knowledge production, of critical inquiry, institutions that nurtured, that could nurture people who could ask questions, the right questions, are being dismantled in front of our eyes. So in that sense, this book becomes a very important and a relevant work for us to not only, glean into our past, but also see that what kind of India was being imagined, and it was possible not very long ago. And finally, the book gives a deep dive into the making of DDK as a historian. We see his journey from analyzing coin weights in numismatics using statistics to his famous formulation on the historical impact of the plow. He made this amazing connection between, whether you use a heavy plow or a light plow, and how that reorders societies. Historiography today, like history writing in India, has moved in many new directions. This kind of structuralist approach isn't the most trendy right now, not especially after postmodernism. When in the Western historiographical traditions, when postmodernism sort of came on the scene, they were called as the barbarians at the gate, and and Marxists were like really sort of holding their guards against these people. In India also, we have seen the kind of post-colonial turn, or the linguistic turn, cultural turn, and so on, the subaltern studies project as well. But as I was working on my thesis and was reading other work, and in our department at Penn, some of my colleagues and I found ourselves truly actually respecting the sheer rigor that went into some of the scholarship that DDK inaugurated and later other people followed. Even though, I need to also place this on record that my supervisor, Dawood Ali, is a very pronounced Marxist historian. So maybe I'm biased, but I think there's a certain, at least in my peer group, I find that there's a certain awe or a reverence towards the old way of writing histories, and DDK features quite at the top in this list. My only slight grievance with DDK has been that I wish he had written more on Goa, except for the one essay that he wrote on Kumnadads in 47. Perhaps, and because most of his contemporaries who were writing history of Goa were trained in Goa, so they knew, Portuguese or Marathi or, other European languages. And it was quite a revealing fact that I realized that he was trained in America and his schooling happened in America. Even though there's a mention that he did learn Portuguese while he was there. So before I end, I must mention the chapter where Professor Ramaswamy details Senior Kosambi's journey towards his death. It was written with such immense empathy and care. I know that part where he writes about Dharmanand's death really stood out for me. Very few passages or like very few portions of any book have stayed with me in that way. And probably that's one of the and that's also tells you about the craft that Professor Ramaswamy has put into writing this book. So I request all of you to pick this book up and read it and celebrate the life of our dear DDK. With that, and just taking off from that, I hope, Comrade Montero did say that there are 2 books in this, but I hope that there's a separate book on Dharmanand also on his way. So with that hope, I leave the stage, and thank you for inviting me here once again.
when the program was announced, I was actually second speaker. But then when Dr. Pushkar told me that I need to coordinate this now, I thought of pushing myself as a third speaker, but I was also nervous, in considering that if the other two speak a lot and I may sound repetitive about what I'm trying to deal with this work. What I will do is basically try to do a historiographical context of this work and the fresh air that Professor Ramaswamy adds to this, not only in terms of the methodology that he brings to write a biography, but also to the life of Kosambi. This is a compelling biography published by HarperCollins. Dharmananda Damodar Kosambi authored and edited nearly a dozen of books and published approximately 175 articles across various subjects. His intellectual legacy has inspired numerous works about him. In fact, soon after his death, there are a number of works which were published, which were led also by the then President of India, V.V. Giri. I will not list out these works and all, but you find number of publications coming up in 1970s which are more focused on Kosambi's achievements as a scholar and trying to claim legacy of Kosambi for different disciplines. The other major turn came in 2007 with Kosambi's centenary, and there was a renewed scholarly interest in his work. That year, universities and academic institutions across India celebrated his enduring legacy. And we had a special issue in Economic and Political Weekly dedicated to Kosambi. So Kosambi is remarkably celebrated as a Marxist historian, Indologist, ethnographer, mathematician, and philologist. Although numerous studies highlight his diverse intellectual contribution, few examine his personal development in depth. Ramaswamy's previous works also followed a similar trajectory. His works like Integrating Mathematics and History, The Scholarship of D.D. Kosambi, an article published in Economic and Political Weekly in 2012, and in 2016 his edited work on Kosambi, D.D. Kosambi Selected Works in Mathematics and Statistics, try to underscore the centrality of mathematics in Kosambi's historical thinking. Writing about Kosambi's contributions to various disciplines and writing a biography fundamentally differs. Unlike his father, Dharmananda Damodar Kosambi, a Buddhist scholar who left memoirs and correspondence in Goa in Marathi periodicals such as Bharat and Swayamsevak, which was subsequently published as his autobiography, Nivedan, as well as his personal narrative called Khulasa, Damodar Kosambi disclosed little about his personal life, beyond his diaries and letters to close friends. Most of these diaries were destroyed after his death, leading scholars to rely primarily on his excessive academic output to interpret his intellectual trajectory, often neglecting his personal development and broader intellectual context. Ramaswamy's biography, in that sense, distinguishes itself by foregrounding the individual behind the scholarly achievement. Drawing on both published and newly unearthed archival material, letters, diaries, and oral histories, this biography reveals many previously hidden facets of Kosambi's life and intellectual world. Structured into 15 chapters, these are not chapters they are basically themes. The book provides a comprehensive analysis of a complex subject by utilizing combined methods which were pioneered by D.D. Kosambi himself. It also examines societal transformations during the Indian freedom struggle and the early years of independence. Notably, the work functions as Dr. Vivek pointed out, dual biography, examining the profound, symbiotic, and occasionally tense relationship between the father and son, Damodar and Dharmananda. The initial section chronicles the elder Kosambi's remarkable journey detailing Dharmanand's spiritual and academic trajectory from Portuguese Goa through South Asia, where he emerged as a leading authority on Pali and Buddhism despite lacking formal academic credentials. Ramaswamy introduces 4 notable interventions regarding Dharmananda that remain underappreciated more than 79 years after his death. The first concerns Dharmananda's role in the Buddhist revival in Maharashtra. The second addresses his contributions as a social thinker and reformer, which are ever less recognized. The third, which is more obscured, concerns the influence of caste, a factor often overlooked because of Dharmanand's rejection of his caste identity. Ramaswamy contextualizes the privileged caste background in shaping Dharmananda's life, noting that although Dharmananda was not entirely defined by his caste, he could not fully transcend it. His close associates were God Saraswat Brahmins, and his initial contacts in various cities or those he sought assistance from were predominantly upper caste. The fourth intervention highlights the previously neglected role of Dharmananda in shaping Damodar's intellectual development. Ramaswamy vividly illustrates the father's influence on Damodar's critical mind. While Dharmananda may have exhibited impracticality in his idealized worldview and financial management, after his visit to Harvard, he approached his parental responsibilities with great seriousness, particularly regarding his 2 elder children, Manik and Damodar. Dharmananda recognized his son's exceptional analytical abilities and the intellectual importance of schooling in America and the liberal academic environment of Harvard. The frequent and wide-ranging discussions fostered in Damodar a lasting passion for scholarship and for subjects such as philology, Sanskrit, Indian history, and more importantly, socialism. Ramaswamy traces the origin of Damodar's literary critical skills to his father's influence, emphasizing that from the Harvard years onwards, Dharmananda cultivated in his son a sustained interest in Sanskrit and ancient India and encouraged interdisciplinary investigation. Ramaswamy also notes that Dharmananda's deep understanding of his son influenced even his decision to locate Damodar's home strategically between Ferguson College and Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute. Thus, the first part of the book demonstrates how Dharmananda profoundly shaped Damodar's intellectual foundation and the mutual commitment to socialism, nationalism, and rigorous academic inquiry. The second part of the book presents a sympathetic yet critical examination of Damodar Dharmananda Kosambi. Ramaswamy demonstrates that while Dharmananda shaped Damodar's interest in history and literature, the rigorous academic environment at Harvard further developed his scholarly identity. During his school and college years, Damodar maintained a personal diary in which he candidly expressed his views on friends and teachers. Although most of these diaries were destroyed after his death, a surviving fragment covers an 18-week period from September 1926 to January 1927, when Damodar was not yet 20. Through these diaries, Ramaswamy uncovers not only Damodar's challenges, but also his academic and financial concerns during this formative period. In discussing Damodar's magnum opus, An Introduction to the Study of Indian History, published in 1956, after 15 years of dedicated efforts that transform Indian historiography, Ramaswamy interestingly recovers the significant contribution of Dr. Monica Felton, to whom the book was originally dedicated. Felton, an English Marxist, activist, writer, a town planner with a PhD from London School of Economics, maintained an intellectually stimulating correspondence with Damodar between 1955 and 1957, documented in over 165 letters that she wrote. Ramaswamy emphasizes Felton's critical editorial input, which helped shape the book's early drafts into its final form. Moreover, Damodar acknowledges her influence by dedicating the book to her. However, when the second edition was published in 1975, the publisher replaced the dedication to Dr. Monica Felton with one to Indo-Soviet friendship, thereby raising Felton's contribution from public memory. Ramaswamy dedicates 3 chapters to the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, where Damodar spent a significant portion of his academic career serving as a professor of mathematics from 1945 to 1962. At TIFR, Damodar was second in position only to founding director Dr. Homi Jahangir Baba. It is important to note that on the one side, while Ramaswamy examines Damodar's role in building up TIFR, a role that TIFR has forgotten, especially in early years, a monumental, as I said, contribution that needs to be recognized. On the other side, he does not shy away from the volatile, blunt, and uncompromising personality of Damodar that alienated colleagues. Delving into his intricate relationship at TIFR, Ramaswamy explores Damodar's ungenerous fallout with Dr. Baba, provoked by a number of compelling factors such as Damodar's unyielding public opposition to nuclear power in favor of solar energy, his erratic institutional behavior, and his flawed Raman hypothesis claims. In final chapters, Ramaswamy intensely engages with the emotional isolation that defined Damodar's life. As Damodar aged, isolated, and feeling underappreciated by his peers, the boundary between the creator and creation began to fight. For years, Damodar lived a double life, writing mathematical papers under the bizarre, dog-inspired pseudonym Sivan Dukre, whom Damodar had invented as an alter ego in the early 1960s. More importantly, Ramaswamy asks us to look closely at what happens when brilliance chooses to fight its final battles from behind the safety of a shadow. Through Ramaswamy's combined methods, approaching of mining archives, personal diaries, oral interviews, and letters scattered across continents, D.D. Kosambi, One Life, Many Worlds, masterfully brings both father and son, Dharmananda and Damodar's lives and scholarship back to life. Thank you. I now open it for the audience. Feel free to ask questions. Be specific about your question and please introduce yourself. We'll take one question at a time, or we'll take one question at a time. So it's open. It's open.
Professor, I will surely read your book on Damodar Dharmananda Kosambi. My name is Satish Kamath. My question is, do you have any documentary evidence that Damodar was born on so and so date, the place where he was born? And sometimes I read suddenly a place called Cosbe, Cosben. To the best of my knowledge, there is no such place in Goa. Either he should have been born in Sankwale or a maternal place at Chikalim. Can you please throw some light on this?
Okay. Yeah, I will certainly do that. But is there any other question? There is no other question. So let me...
Unrelated question. Thanks to the panel for discussing the book. I just have a small quibble. In the interest of academic rigor, it would be nice if there was something critical about the book that you had to say. Surely Professor Ramaswamy didn't write the perfect book, right? Kaustubh Naik, for instance, had a quibble against Kosambi for not writing about Goa. Anything, something about his book?
I think this impression you are carrying since the way in which ICG has put up this entire show, meaning it's come as a book discussion, but we don't discuss in that sense. This is a launch, this is a celebration. We can have a critique, we can engage with the book very closely at some point of time. This is celebration of Kosambi and this is a launch, book launch.
Okay.
Can I respond to that? Just today is his birthday, so you shouldn't be criticizing him. It's his birthday today, so you shouldn't be criticizing him. Also, when we start our PhD work, usually Kosambi. Yeah. So when we start our PhD work, usually you are trained in seminars to critique every book that you read. But once you start writing your PhD, it humbles you in many ways. So now I'm at that stage where I don't want to. Writing a book takes a monumental effort. So yeah, sorry.
I think you missed a criticism that I made of the book, Ram's book. I said that I did not agree entirely with the way in which this book, this biography, deals with the mathematics contribution of D.D. Kosambi. I think Ram has been a little bit hard on Kosambi in the way he writes about Kosambi's mathematics. In the first book that came out, 3 essays, there's one essay called Adventures into the Unknown, and that's Kosambi's own note about himself, and that ends with a description of his work in mathematics. And I think his work does require a closer look. Kosambi was not a person to make trivial statements, and the book that he sent, which was lost, but there is an annotated version, tells me, in the Nehru Memorial Library, that we have to look at that more closely. And I think he has a background, in mathematics. I also have the same background in mathematics. So this is something which I would like to do. The work in differential geometry, the work in statistics, and the relationship between differential geometry, statistics, and number theory. And what is described as the Kosambi hypothesis very favorably by, a mathematician. So these are things which I think are scope for future research. And that's maybe something that the D.D. Kosambi study group can do, and people in the mathematics department here at Goa University can certainly, contribute there. Kaustubh also said that he criticized Kosambi that he did not write sufficiently about Goa. I would like to bring to your attention that there is a book about the pre-Portuguese history of Goa, written by a Marxist who met Kosambi, and he mentions that in this book. This is a book called An Outline of Pre-Portuguese History of Goa, written by a fellow trade unionist like me, Gerald Pereira. And it's a very interesting book, and this is something that the D.D. Kosambi study group can take up, because yes, there is so much about the history of Goa that can yield understanding when it's approached with the tools of science, and now we have new tools like human genomic analysis. So I think Kosambi is really an explorer, and this book is an invitation to exploration by the Goa University of so many areas in which he broke new ground. He was a pioneer.
Okay, so you see, Anna, the book isn't perfect, right? And neither was Kosambi, nor am I, and all that. And one of the just a few other comments before I come to answer that particular question. Having written a book, one feels sort of the joy of looking at some newborn thing, and you want to know and feel that everything is perfect, everything is perfectly formed. And of course you open one page and immediately the typos that you had, right? And then you also, it teaches you also to view your friends very, very cautiously. because they are the ones who are going to be writing to you and telling you that, I know it's a small mistake, but on page 50 you've spelt one word in 3 different ways and you want to kill them. So I'm now making a diary of all the errors pointed out by friends and or by ex-friends, I should say. Okay, but jokes aside, there's one point that I would like to actually acknowledge. Both Kaustubh and Vivek have pointed out, and also Parag pointed out that there's a lot of Dharmananda Kosambi in the book, and that was inevitable. Actually, when I first went to the New India Foundation to propose this book, I was snotty and somewhat, very sophomoric humor. I said, everyone writes a biography. I'm going to write a triography. We're going to have Dharmananda Kosambi, Damodar Kosambi, and Meera Kosambi, who was an accomplished sociologist, and many in this room know her, and she was there at the And the foundation looked at me and said, please, when you regain your senses, you will never going to do this. And they just said, no, you just focus on Damodar. But several people have actually pointed out to me that Damodar's life inspired them a little more than, Dharmanand's life inspired them a little more than Damodar's. But whatever. It's a complex thing. This Kosben business is what interested me as well, and it started my first interaction with Parag because I couldn't find Kosben on a map, which I said is fine. It doesn't, it's not surprising. Names change and all that. And so I wrote to Professor Peter D'Souza, who's in the audience, asking him, who can tell me about Portuguese names and what have you, and where I might find the history of these places. And he led me on to Parag, and I came to talk to him about, where is this Kosben? Of course, Parag had no idea because there is no Kosben. The closest that we can try to figure out is there's some place which is vaguely sounds like Kosben, might have been spelled with an X in the old Portuguese style, near Sanguem. That's the closest that I've been able to figure it out. There is a documented evidence, okay, as far as the date of his birth is concerned, it's there in the Harvard class 10 ka jo certificate milta hai. All those certificates have got the 29th of June, the 31st of July written over there. Indrani Saukar, who was his sister Manorama's daughter, she has written a book on the father, on Dharmanand. It's a fictional account of his life. It's not, there's very, well, according to some other cousins, there's very little fact in it. So a niece of Damodar Kosambi, that is Sister Manorama's daughter, her name was, she was born Kunda Sathe, married, and her name is now Indrani Saukar. She lives in Bangalore. She's written a biography of the grandfather where she has a picture of the house, which was, the pictures are there in the book. Anyway, the point is that all the children of Dharmanand Kosambi and Balabai were born in the maternal home in Chikali, which is there in the Bades, is the Chikali north of Mapusa. Balabai Kosambi's maiden name was Lad, and her brother Sakharam Lad had a practice in Mapusa. So they are from that area. There were 4 children: Manik, Damodar, Manorama, whose daughter wrote this biography, and the last one is Kamala. whose daughter Urmila is also in the audience. Urmila Jain is over here. So, that's... Now I know so much about the Kosambis and their families and their cousins, the second, third, fourth cousins, that I keep a tree and a history. But there is no doubt about it that all the children were in fact born in Chikali. There's no Kosbeni.
My question is about, we all know now that Kosambi was a polymath. And with so many academics sitting there, now we have specialization, over-specialization, and we kind of frown on people who go into others' territories. I mean, in the past we had glorious polymaths like Leonardo da Vinci and all that. Do you think there is a kind of flow where we are losing that polymath geniuses by putting us into boxes? I became a doctor and then eye surgeon and then retinal specialist and then macular specialist, and we lose the other things that we are capable of, we can do, because the society sort of doesn't appreciate that. Do you think there's an element of that?
The description of the problem is quite correct. Today, academics is largely requires a very narrow attention, and at the same time, there are people who engage with a subject which naturally requires them to look at different aspects, different subjects. Now, for example, if you're engaging with a subject like nuclear power plant, okay, so there are so many aspects about that. There is the environmental impact, there is the risk aspect, there is the power sector economics aspect. So a person who wants to go into that will have to examine all these and write about all these different aspects. So I think there are many people who are actively engaged with current problems and who are therefore looking at not just one aspect, narrow aspect, but things in a broader perspective. Another issue is the whole issue of the peopling of India. Okay, that is something which is a very has many aspects, many ramifications. So if you took up a subject like the peopling of Goa, how did the Goan population come into being? That will require so many different methods, combined methods. And so I think if you take a problem that's sufficiently potent, then the polymath is something which comes out of that engagement. And there are people who are engaging with important problems. I hope this is something that the D.D. Kosambi study group also will... No, we have big hopes on Goa University. I mean, this is...
Do you want to say something about that? Let me also, to you, sir, there's a discussion in the book about certain issues of what academic freedom and so on. In particular, some very important judgments from the United States Supreme Court. So let me just read out the judgment by Justice Felix Frankfurter on exactly the issue that you're talking about. He says, progress in the natural sciences is not remotely confined to findings made in the laboratory. Insights into the mysteries of nature are born of hypothesis and speculation. The more so is this true in the pursuit of understanding in the groping endeavors of what are called the social sciences, the concern of which is man and society. The problems that are the respective preoccupations of anthropology, economics, law, psychology, sociology, and related areas are merely departmentalized dealings by way of manageable division of analysis with interpenetrating aspects of holistic perplexities. Not my language, but anyway. For society is good if understanding be an essential need of society. Inquiries into these problems, speculations about them, stimulation of others, of reflection upon them must be left unfettered. So, these issues were discussed and debated, and I certainly side on with Justice Frankfurter. The subjects are really not as separate as we pretend they are, and we should be allowed to explore them. I've been just fortunate that I've had the freedom, thanks to 65 being a magical retirement age in our society. I have had the freedom to do pretty much what I liked. Also, the fact that I taught at JNU for so many years allowed me to do that. But I think that it's a big mistake to compartmentalize.
I think I'll just get back very quickly to some remarks about the questions or observations not being critical enough of how you have written the book. Very quick story. 3 years ago, we had, just a bit over that, we had a scholar in residence just like you, who finished a 2-volume biography on Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And soon after, I had a visitor in my office, and we were talking about, books that had been recently published. And the remark made by the visitor was that, this is a great book, but why say terrible things about a man who is no longer with us? And I thought to myself, yes, that's one thing we have sort of said, we don't want to do, especially on the occasion of the great Kosambi's birth anniversary. But I think biographies need to do that. All the time. If you're really writing a biography, you'll do that. You talk about the character, and you also talk about the person who has bravely attempted to do that in the case of D.D. Kosambi. But I think the first thing that came to my mind was last year we had the biographer of the great Vishwesaraya come here for the Goa Arts and Lit Fest. And over the last 10 years there have been several biographies on forgotten or not so forgotten figures in Indian history. We had KPS Menon's biographer and so on and so forth. Do you feel, while writing this book, did you get the sense that other than Kosambi, and I know you are also very much engaged with the father, and we have talked about how a separate biography could be written about him. But do you get the sense that there is probably a need to revive biographies, writing biographies on some of these scientists from the 19th, 20th century? A bit of that work is being done by Abu Dhabi-based academic Rahul. I'm forgetting his name, but somebody who is who is now going into the archives, 19th century, early 20th century. Rahul Sagar. So Rahul Sagar is doing something like that, but mostly of texts, not so much of people. But is it possible? Did you get a sense, and you'll probably while you go across the country promoting the book, that other than freedom fighters and others, we should really get into this business of writing biographies of our 18th, 19th, 20th century scientists?
Well, I'm hardly going to say no, but also because I think that this is a genre which is generally ignored in India. We celebrate our politicians, and we celebrate our statesmen and our movie stars. but we really do need to have Desperately Seeking C.V. Raman or similar books where you try to find out what really these people were up to and how they worked. Part of the problem, I think, is the lack of public support. And I mean, let me acknowledge the New India Foundation that they agreed to it, but I should also acknowledge that this is the second time I was trying. So I mean, it wasn't as if I went there and I said, I'll write a biography of Kosambi, and they said, oh yeah, here's the money. I was made to work for it. So it's not as if there aren't that many opportunities for people, and I think that, finding funding, I mean, this takes time. It takes, 2-3 years of work. You need support at that time, and publishers are not going to give it to you. So, there's some way of having to find it, but it's certainly necessary, I think. We need our own heroes. Everyone is going to be inspired by Marie Curie or Albert Einstein. They are beyond boundaries. But, to be realistic, Kosambi will not speak very far outside India.
I mean, hello. Just to add, also the state of our archives is another, as the gentleman rightly pointed out, these birth records lying in MAPSA. But many of our people we don't have proper collections, they're not indexed, they're not categorized. So that also becomes a problem. Actually, in fact, I had a question, probably we can take this later, is that your experience of tracing these people's lives in American institutions where they had records from his 10th standard mark sheet, and it would be very difficult to find that probably.
Impossible.
Yeah. Would you like to talk about that journey that you took in, your archival?
Oh, yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Kaustubh. I mean, archives are a nightmare in India. And actually, it was very lucky that Kosambi went to school in America. From a biographer's point of view, because I remember going to the Harvard library and looking for his records in the. You see, there's a small technical problem. He failed 1 year. Okay, the great man, he joined Harvard to study engineering, didn't like the course, didn't write the exam, and failed. Then he came back to India. So when he joined Harvard, he would have graduated in 1927. Dropped a year, came back, etc., and then finally he graduated in 29. So American universities produce something called a yearbook, where the origin of Facebook is really because Harvard has a yearbook, and what Mr. Zuckerberg was doing was to recreate that online. There's just nugget of contemporary information. But the yearbook for 1927, it doesn't have a picture of Kosambi. It has everybody's picture and biography. It didn't have an entry on Kosambi. The one for 1929 also didn't have it, and it was one of those 2 years that should have had it. So I went to the archivist and I said, look, I'm trying to figure out this chap. He went back to the admission records and he got me the application that Kosambi had made to be admitted to Harvard, what he had written and what not, and then we were able to verify the dates. Now this kind of work is impossible in Ferguson College or any place that most Indian institutions don't keep records beyond a certain date. There's one chapter over here on Monica Felton that, Parag alluded to. I have 165 letters from Monica to D.D. Kosambi because he kept them. His letters to her lost. I don't know where they are, and she died in Madras, So it's not as if, so if at all it should be there, it could have been there in some archive in India, it's not available. So it's a nightmare finding stuff.
I think we'll end here. And once again, thank you for joining us. Thank you.